You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Well, hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and you are listening to episode 139 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. I have two stories for y'all today about a sand trap surprise and stealing the sun. But first, let's talk a little bourbon. I'm pouring myself a glass of Rhetoric 24-year-old bourbon. Cheers, y'all. I gotta say, this is, to me, the absolute perfect aged bourbon. It's part of the Orphan Barrel collection, a supposedly rescued batch from the old Stitzel-Weller warehouse. Now, this limited release is a little bit of an experiment. What they're doing is releasing it every year as it ages. They started at 20. Word is they're going up to 25, but possibly maybe even to 30, who knows? As for me, I've had their 22, 23, and now their 24-year releases, and I gotta say this one is hands down my favorite. The mash bill is mostly corn, about 86% I think, and then it's rounded out with a little bit of barley and rye, and it's only 90 proof. I mean, when you sit that long in a barrel, you're definitely going to lose a little bit of that alcohol burn. And wow, this bourbon, it tastes like chocolate. It does. It tastes like chocolate wrapped up in a tobacco leaf. It's got a little bit of a coffee thing going on too, and it's smooth and creamy and so good. So good. And it's especially nice to sip right now because something monumental happened the other day. I took my car through a car wash all by myself. Now, I realize this really should not be news because for most people, this is an incredibly average, everyday thing. But for me, well, driving through a car wash by myself is a huge deal wrapped up in sheer terror. Because, y'all, I think I've made mention of this before, but I am a lousy driver. I wish I could explain what my malfunction is. I suppose it could be depth perception, or maybe lack of general skill, or maybe even both, just compounded by incessant stupidity. But I'll tell you, for as dumb as my fear is, it's not entirely irrational. I warned my guy about my less than impressive driving skills within the very few first weeks of getting to know each other. I mean, it was really the right thing to do because it's not a workable quirk. You know, it's not like not being able to figure out how to connect to Wi-Fi or having an extra toe or something like that. Being a shitty driver is a safety issue. And as I outlined all of the reasons why I should not be trusted to drive in parking lots, car washes, drive-thrus, or even at all in unfamiliar areas, and especially not after dark, my guy laughed at me. He thought I was exaggerating. Silly man. Sadly for him, it would not be long before I would be reminding him of that very conversation. And then he'd be saying the phrase that is all too common in our relationship. Damn it, I should have listened to you. Still, I suppose it's safe to say that even I didn't expect to be having that conversation on a golf course, of all places. I had never played golf before meeting my guy. I mean, I never really considered it. I mean, like driving, my track record in sports is vaguely terrifying. It's just not something I'm good at. But after going to the driving range with my guy a few times, I really kind of took to it. I gotta say, I love the formality of golf. And I like the fact that it's really only me playing against me. You know, there's this cool posture to it. Swinging a golf club sort of reminds me of finding the perfect pose in yoga, with the added bonus of getting to hit something with a club. And then when I heard my guy's final sales pitch, that drinking is entirely allowed on a golf course, well, I was all in. I looked at him and I said, I can hit things with a club and drink? Why the hell hadn't I been playing golf sooner? I got suited up in a cute little golf outfit, and my guy drove us out to a semi-private 18-hole course. It was a classic parkland course, so it had trees and sand traps, And it was probably a little bit too advanced for a novice like me, but according to my guy, I would have a way better experience there. My only knowledge of golf courses up to that point was pretty much limited to what I'd seen in Caddyshack. I mean, really, there are only so many times that you can quote, "So I got that going for me," on a golf date before you risk being abandoned on the third tee. But I had to admit my guy was right about the experience. It was a gorgeous sunny day, and for 9 holes we hit balls, drank cocktails, and zipped around in a golf cart. And it was awesome. I was having a blast. But then, my guy's cell phone rang. I was still learning then that my guy's job requires him to be available most hours of the day to solve problems and close deals. And I know now that these calls can take a while, so I've become accustomed to pacing myself and finding ways to stay occupied while he conducts his business. But back then, what do you think I did? I flagged down the drink girl and I knocked back a cocktail. And another cocktail. And in all of my nervous early dating energy, I started sucking on a third cocktail. When out of nowhere, we were interrupted by a loud, very angry voice. It was another golfer. Thus far, we had had the luxury of playing on a very empty course. But in the time that my guy was on the phone, a foursome had caught up to us and apparently had been waiting quite a while for us to tee off. I may not have been an expert in golf etiquette, but even I knew that this guy telling us to move our asses was bad form. So I yelled back, "We'll play when we're damn well ready to play." This seems like a totally appropriate response to me because screw that guy. We were there first. But my guy overhears this exchange and he just kind of shakes his head because apparently that's not how golf works. He mutes his phone for a minute and suggests that I play the hole and take the cart, and says he'll catch up with me in a few minutes. Now it's my turn to shake my head because I don't like this plan one bit. I mean, for one thing, I'm not entirely sure where that next hole is, and another, I'd never driven a golf cart. And sure, I'd watched my guy do it, but that doesn't exactly translate into ability. But he's already walking toward the drink shack and leaving me alone with a cart full of clubs and a fairly healthy drunk. So somehow, this whole golf outing is seeming like less and less of a good idea. I grab the first club that I see, a putter, and I attempt to line up a shot in the general direction I think the ball is supposed to go. Then I give it a good swing. But with that shorter shaft, I don't really do much but rustle the air around the ball. I looked like an absolute moron. And I know this now. But back then, I was just frustrated and trying to play through. And it doesn't help that I've got this foursome closing in on me, and they're all tapping their feet and groaning and saying things like, "Hey, why don't you try hitting that with your purse?" Really, guys? Come on. I mean, it's all I can do to not grab the ball and hurl it right back at their heads. So I stop and I regroup a little bit and I start thinking this through. And, well, then fortunately I realize that I am using the wrong club. So I blush a little bit, but I return to the cart to grab a driver. Well, and now, in addition to being embarrassed, I'm a little stompy and angry because I want to get this right. So I head back to the tee and I set up my shot. And I can hear those goddamn ball sacks behind me laughing. And I'm thinking, I'll show them. So I draw my club back and I take a beautiful swing. Oh, it flows right through the air and connects with the ball and sends it sailing way across the course. And I'm going, yes, yes. And, well, inconveniently, I had also sent that ball sailing in the wrong direction. Not that I knew this. Me, I'm all proud and stompy, and I give that foursome a triumphant little grin as I hop into my cart. What I want is to make a glorious exit, with my hair blowing in the breeze and that dick posse marveling at my amazing golf grace. But what I do, instead, is slam my foot down on the gas pedal and send that stupid little cart and myself rocketing forward so fast, I leave skid marks on the green. Oops. I knew that I was supposed to go back and patch up the ground that I had destroyed, but I was just too annoyed and too mortified. I do, however, ease off the gas a little bit, and I do my best to maneuver the cart in the general direction that my ball went. I'm sure there was a designated cart path, but I definitely did not follow it. Instead, I started careening up and down the hill, searching for my ball, and as I started to feel more comfortable, I started to think, well, hell, this is fun. Maybe I should go for a little joyride. What could it hurt? So me and my cart start sprinting around the golf course a little bit, and up ahead I see that my guy is walking towards where the ball should have went. And when I see him, I call out, "Hey, baby, watch this." Those are not words any guy wants to hear as his chick sails past him in a golf cart like an unhinged Danica Patrick. What can I say? In that moment, I loved golf. Never mind those assholes behind me who gave me problems, and forget that silly little ball that I had lost somewhere in the rough. I was a little drunk, having fun, and stupidly proud of myself for figuring out how to drive that golf cart. I approach a large, sort of kidney-shaped sand trap then, and I get it into my dumb little head that it would be fun to drive the perimeter of it. So I do just fine when I'm on the far edge. But as I circle that curved interior, my notoriously rotten depth perception gets the best of me, and I catch the tires on the steep edge of the bunker. So now I'm driving at an angle, right? The cart is kind of tipped precariously on its right side, half in and half out of that pit like a roller coaster run awry. The clubs in the back are just spilling out into that sand trap. And in the background, my guy is calling out, "Stop the cart! Just hit the brakes, baby!" Well, this kind of freaks me out a little bit. And panic works in funny ways sometimes. So despite knowing full well what the correct thing to do was, I did the opposite. Some dark little imp just sat on my shoulder and whispered in my ear that I could totally get myself out of the situation if I just hit the gas. So I do. I plow my foot right down onto that gas pedal, and again, the cart pops forward, which surprises the hell out of me. And I jerk the wheel to the right, and this time I barrel right over the edge and drive that cart directly into the sand trap. And that is exactly where my guy found me, laughing and crying simultaneously as I spit sand up into the air in a completely futile attempt to unbury my cart. I really don't care to relay what happened after that. I will say that we had to flag down that foursome behind us and enlist their help in pushing the cart out of the bunker, and they were none too pleased about it. So for everyone's sake, we decided to call it a day after that. This is why it is such a tremendous moment for me now to navigate my stupid car through a car wash. I know, it's silly, it's stupid, but my hope is that maybe, if I do this enough, I will prove to my guy that I am capable of driving a golf cart again. A girl can hope. Cheers, y'all. So I talked to my friend Texas today, and she announced that she had some kind of sad news. And when she says this, I can feel it in the pit of my stomach, and I'm thinking, oh, this can't be good. So I brace myself, expecting the worst. But all she says is, "I'm getting rid of the yellow chair." That wasn't at all what I was expecting her to say, and I'm not entirely sure how to respond. To be honest, I hadn't thought about that yellow chair in a really long time. But as the news sunk in, I have to admit that I started to feel a little bummed out. Because you see, that yellow chair has had a hell of a life. It was the very first piece of furniture that I ever bought. I found it while wishful wandering through an old Robinson's May store back in the 90s when I lived in Los Angeles. I had recently rented my very first apartment out there, and it was mostly furnished with garage sale rejects and a couple of poorly constructed abominations from IKEA. None of it was especially attractive or comfortable, but it was functional. And I didn't even really much care until I spotted the chair. And y'all have to understand, when I say the chair, you have to envision the word with a capital letter T and C, because this chair was something special. It was huge and overstuffed and practically a neon shade of yellow. And I loved it. I loved it from the instant I sank down in its plushy, cushiony seat and kicked my legs over the side. I had never really felt any strong attachment to an inanimate object until I met that chair. And as I lounged there in the store, I knew I had to have this thing. There was just something about it. And I doubt I could ever really explain why that chair appealed to me. All I can say is that it just felt good. Buying it did require opening a store charge card, but I can't say that I really cared. 2 days later, that chair was delivered to my living room, and I could not have been happier. I curled right up in that overstuffed wonder and felt at home. My quasi-roommate, however, was less than thrilled. For this story, I'll call him the hiker. He was another musician who had a huge rush of success in the early 90s, and then never really recovered from that whole Nirvana massacre. He was currently trying to make a living giving guided hiking tours by day, and then dragging his band around to shitty clubs at night. The hiker had been crashing with me for a few months, and he kind of considered us boyfriend and girlfriend. I definitely did not, and this was rapidly becoming an issue. He just stared at that chair when it was delivered and pouted. He thought we should be making furniture purchases together, as if his opinion actually mattered. I mean, despite not being my boyfriend or even someone who was on the lease. And the fact that that chair was really only a one-person kind of chair, well, that just hurt his feelings. Boo-hoo. So he refused to sit in the chair. Instead, he would just pile his laundry or his gear on the chair in protest of its existence. And me, well, I just sweep it all off onto the floor in response. After a few weeks of this kind of back and forth, I finally had enough of the hiker. I promise you, it wasn't just his irrational hatred of the chair. He was clingy and whiny, and half the time his rent checks bounced. So, he had to go. It was perfect timing because my friend Texas was about to fly in from Chicago for a visit. And I really hadn't been looking forward to the hiker trying to weasel in on all of our plans. I gave him a date to get the hell out, and he reluctantly agreed. But I should have known it would not be that easy. For the next week, he gave me every conceivable excuse as to why he couldn't leave. He had a cold, he had rehearsal, he couldn't find any boxes. His official move-out date coincided with Texas getting to town. And as I got ready to pick her up from the airport, I gave him an ultimatum. If the hiker wasn't gone by the time I got back, Texas and I would gleefully and without mercy throw all of his belongings into the pool. And if that wasn't enough encouragement, well, there was always the ringleader, a far beefier musician than the hiker, who would be all too glad to boot his ass out for me. I returned a few hours later with Texas. I had braced her for the possibility of a little moving party. And to be honest, we were both kind of hopeful that we'd have the chance to throw his shitty guitars out the window, because that just sounded like fun. But when I opened the door, and I didn't have to dodge a giant app to get in, I knew the hiker was gone. Ugh, such a relief. I flipped on the lights and we walked into the apartment. Me all the while peeking into rooms just to make sure he wasn't hiding in a closet like some sort of creeping troll. I'd seen he'd taken his gold record and CD collection, along with the TV, which didn't really surprise me. But as I stopped and surveyed the living room, I saw that something else was missing. It took me a beat to figure it out, but when I did, I lost my mind. That thieving ass monster took the chair. My chair, My beautiful, comfy chair that in another 35 payments would be all mine. Texas ducked as I start hurling magazines and books at the wall and just raving like a lunatic over the nerve of that fuckface. This guy who was such a shitty musician that he had never elevated beyond being a fucking rhythm guitar player. I'll tell you, him taking that chair felt no different than if he had just burned my house down. Oh, I wanted to end him. Texas found the whiskey in the kitchen, which thankfully the hiker never drank, and poured me a shot. Over another 3, 4, maybe 5 shots, I told her about my love affair with this chair, and she and I came up with a plan. We were going to steal it back. The hiker had underestimated my taste for revenge, as well as my resourcefulness, because I knew a few things he didn't. Like the fact that I was screwing around with his lead singer. You can spare me the judgy looks for messing around with 2 guys in the same band. I never said I was a nice person back then. Anyway, the singer wasn't especially fond of the hiker. None of the guys in the band were. They all thought the same thing about him that I did. I just had the advantage of being able to kick him out. They kept him around because he was the only one who had a large van that they could all cart their gear in. So he was all too happy to give me the information that I needed. Turns out, the hiker was shacked up with the band's drummer, who lived just a few blocks away in a first-floor apartment off Ventura Boulevard. And after I made a quick call to the drummer and gave him a promise that I would help him write his resume, he agreed to leave the patio door unlocked while they were off at rehearsal that night. Well, that left us with one not-so-small problem. How the hell were we going to get the chair back to my apartment? There was no way it would fit in my shitty little car. It was too late to rent a truck. And sadly, the only musician I knew with a van was the same damn guy who'd stolen my chair in the first place. So I look at Texas and I just say, we'll carry it back. Really? Texas does not look enthusiastic, so I shrug and I ask, well, do you have a better plan? Sadly, Texas did not, and she just sighs as if she has realized that maybe things have gone a little too far. Of course they had. Who goes to these lengths for a chair? Me. I do. Because it was the principle of the thing, and we were committed. So the 2 of us threw on our darkest clothing and set out that night to re-steal what was rightfully mine. Neither one of us were especially good thieves, unfortunately, because the minute we arrived at the drummer's apartment building, we realized we had no idea which unit was his. I mean, it's not like they'd do something as convenient as put apartment numbers on the outside of the building. Texas and I take cover in some bushes and case the perimeter. I'd never been to the drummer's apartment, so I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. And obviously, Texas had never seen my chair. So the 2 of us just kind of rustle around in the bushes like a couple of pervy raccoons for a good 20 minutes until I finally caught glimpse of something that seemed kind of familiar. It was on a patio at the far corner of the building. I saw a rickety card table, a few sagging lawn chairs, and several beer bottles jammed full of cigarette butts. Either a bunch of musicians lived there or a couple of frat guys. And really, the line between the 2 is vague at best. It was the best indication that we had that maybe we'd found the apartment. It really was the best clue we'd had all night that we might be in the right place. So I figured, what the hell? I crept up under that patio and I peer into the living room. Thank God the lights were on. And as I pressed my face against the glass, I saw exactly what I had been hoping for. The chair. It was pushed into a corner and again covered with a hiker's dirty laundry, but otherwise it seemed unharmed and pretty easy to get to. And as promised, that patio door slid right open to let me and Texas in. The minute she sees that chair, Texas just glares at me. She is seriously upset and looking as though she wants nothing more than to wrap her hands around my neck. She says, You didn't tell me this goddamn chair is frog piss yellow. I look at Texas and I'm all, why are you so mad? What difference does it make? And that is where she loses her cool. Because she says, what difference does it make? You made me dress up like a fucking gravedigger when all the while we're stealing something that glows in the dark. Don't you think someone is going to get a little curious when they see us hauling this thing down the street? I guess she had a point. Still, I was not about to let that derail our mission. This was my chair, damn it. And I wasn't going to let it spend its life being the laundry rack for a washed-up hairband. I quickly scanned the room. These were musicians. They had to have something dark I could throw over the thing. I grab a stained gray comforter from the couch and I toss one end over to Texas. Great, she says. Throw a tarp over the sun. That'll help. We wrestle the comforter over the chair and each grab one end. Holy balls, that thing was heavy. Texas grunts as we heave the chair out the door. And in the process, we knock into that little beer garden, sending several bottles clattering to the ground and surely alerting the planet that two dumb chicks were attempting the world's single worst heist. We make it onto the sidewalk as best we can, hauling a chair the size of a hippo between us. The 3 blocks to my own apartment building just stretch in front of us like infinity. I'm about to say something stupid and encouraging like, hey, it's not that bad. At least my building has an elevator. When out of nowhere, I am hit in the face with a bright light. Oh yeah, y'all. That was the police. I suppose I should not have been surprised. Texas sure wasn't. She looks over at me, and I fully expect her to drop that beast of a chair right there on my feet and wish me luck in prison. But she doesn't. Instead, Texas just starts to laugh. And as I see her face streaming with tears, I can't help but give in to the giggles myself. What the hell were we thinking? The chair is shaking dangerously between us as we sputter and choke. So we place it down on the sidewalk, and the two of us just fall into it, stupid with laughter. The police don't even know where to start with us. After we calm down a little bit, they run our names and issue sobriety tests, which we both shockingly passed. They then sat us down on the curb and listened as I blathered out the whole ridiculous story. I could see the officers trying to hide smiles as I talk, and I wasn't sure if they were charmed by my wackiness or just looking forward to putting me in handcuffs. But then the lead officer asks, "Do you have proof of ownership of this chair?" "Well, not on me," I said, "but I do at home." The officers walk away to confer. Neighbors have started to gawk at us from behind their curtains and blinds, and I have to admit that this does not look good. Texas is sitting tall next to me. She's stopped laughing, but the tears have left her face kind of dewy in the light of the squad car. The chair is still sitting on the sidewalk, just a gleaming monument of pride and poorly planned revenge. And then there's me, tragically stuck somewhere between Thelma and Louise and Fatal Attraction, and completely lacking the skills to pull either off. The cops walk back to us, and I realize that there is a distinct possibility we are about to be arrested. And my mind just starts to buzz. I'm starting to freak out a little bit, and I'm trying to think, what can I do? How can I stave this off? Do I plead forgiveness? Promise to never steal my own stuff again? Is there any way that I can talk my way out of this? Instead, I just follow Texas, and I keep my mouth shut. For a change. The head officer looks down at us and says, "This has to be the dumbest thing I've ever seen." We both nod, solemnly. He continues to scold us for another minute, but then he says, "Look, since your only real crime here appears to be bad judgment, I'm going to let you both go with a warning." I'll tell you, it took all of my reserve to not jump up and just hug that officer, because I knew full well I wasn't cut out for jail. Texas looks equally relieved, and we both stand up to thank the officer profusely. I motion toward the chair, which is still kind of glowing indecently under the moon, and I ask what's going to happen to it. The officer laughs then, and he says, "Look, we're not in the business of impounding furniture." So instead, he calls the community resource truck for us. Normally, it's used to collect stray dogs and help people who are locked out of their cars. But for us, these officers actually loaded that hulking chair into the back of the truck and drove us all to my apartment. I offered those cops the proof of purchase just in case the hiker tried to do something cute like file a theft report. But I didn't have to worry. I never heard from the hiker again. As for the chair, well, it became one of the few constants in my life. Through all of the turmoil that I had, it followed me from every apartment to every job, everywhere in Los Angeles that I went, and even back across the country when I moved to Chicago. I did everything in that chair. I read in it, I drank in it, occasionally I had sex in it. Sometimes that chair was all I had to sleep in. And y'all, I wrote my first book in that chair. Years later, as I was about to move in with my guy, I knew it was time for the chair to find a new home. Texas and her husband had just bought their first house together. And oh, did I have the perfect housewarming present. I can still hear her laughter when she found that chair on her doorstep one morning. I had dressed it up in a fancy new slipcover, but there was no containing its yellow awesomeness. We dragged that chair into her spare bedroom, where it remained to see Texas through the final years of her medical residency and the birth of her first child. She asked me today if I wanted to give it a final goodbye. But I don't think I will. I think I'd rather just remember that chair in all of its ridiculous neon yellow glory and hope that it gives another person as much comfort as it gave me. Cheers, y'all. Oh, I love this bourbon. Hey, by the way, I did a driveway drinking video where I took my very first sips of this Rhetoric 24-year bourbon. And we're going to be posting that to my YouTube channel this week. So you might want to head over there and check it out. Or go to my website, theunwritablерant.com. Check out my essays, my book, or hey, maybe some of my merchandise, like flasks or t-shirts. And now, if y'all will excuse me, I'm going to go have some more bourbon and find some more trouble. I'll be back next week to chat with you some more. Thanks for listening, y'all. Cheers.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter @MorningNeurosis.
Girl, you as pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away and let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton lady. Hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Like